So we're back for the final Perils in Paradise mini set card review, and it's a big one. I kind of skipped the last 2 days. I had some family visiting, and then frankly, I just wasn't that like excited to talk about most of these cards. I don't know, man. There's they seem kind of weak, number one, but also just from a like deck creativity standpoint, I wasn't like really planning some awesome stuff based on what I was seeing. So, you know, there's some individually interesting designs, but I don't know if they're kicking off like cool deck ideas or anything. So I lacked a little motivation, frankly, to grind out videos for the last 2 days, but I definitely wanted to follow up and get all of these reviewed. So we'll try to go through these a little faster than normal since this is a really big review. And we'll kick things off here with the Death Knight cards, starting with Travel Security. And this guy's face kind of sums up my feelings about this mini set. I don't want to dunk too hard. Obviously, we'll see these in play. Maybe some cool ideas will pop up. And you know, I know some of you are sensitive to me being negative about Hearthstone in general, but as I'll say again, as I said in the first review, I actually play Hearthstone a lot. I've been hitting Legend every single month. It's not that I'm down on the game, just this mini set's not the most compelling to me. So anyway, Travel Security, 6 mana, 2/2 undead, taunt, and death rattle. Summon a random 8-cost minion. The 8-cost pool, it's okay. There are obviously some big high rolls. The classic examples of Ragnaros and Grom and so on can be okay. There's also some really weak stuff. There's like, you know, Deep Miner Bran is a 2/4, and I looked, there's a handful of like 5/5s and 4/6s and stuff that are relying on battle cries. So a lot of the time you play this, it's going to be a 2/2 that summons you a 2/4 or a 5/5, and that is just not good enough at 6 mana, and I don't think the high rolls are going to make up for that at all. Like, yes, it technically has some death rattle synergies, but this one is a really slow and passive kind of play, and it's like not even really defensive because it's going to be so easy for opponents to push through the taunt half of this, and then the odds of you getting another taunt are so slim that, you know, they just keep hitting you in the face and pounding you, and if you get like rush minions and stuff, it's kind of wasted. So very often I think this is just going to feel super awkward in hand and super clunky. I was actually like looking at other cards to kind of compare this to, and this one came to mind for Shaman. This card's like a few years old, I guess, now at this stage. It arrived with Death Knight, it looks like. It's Shaman, it's different, right? But it's a 5 mana 2/2 taunt. It's got Reborn, and you're getting really reliable results out of this, like 4/4s with taunt. You know, you're getting like defensive walls. Sure, they're not as big, but you know, it's consistent, it's defensive, it's cheaper, and it's a few years older. So this to me just does not keep up on the same planet as a card even like this one, which I don't remember this being a particularly good card. Also, I don't remember this card. I thought this was a different card. I thought it like made a 6/6 or something. Maybe this got buffed or changed. I don't remember, but maybe I just forgot it. That's certainly a possibility too. Life has been crazy, having a baby over the last few years, trying to have a baby, so who knows, I may just misremember. But anyway, comparatively, I just don't see how Travel Security holds a candle to so many other things that feel more consistent and faster, even with any like death rattle synergies or whatever. This just doesn't make sense to me. Moving on to Eternal Layover. This is a 4 mana single unholy rune spell. This gives all minions Reborn, then destroys all minions. And it's like, okay, here's a way to give this Reborn, which this card already has. We gotta spend 4 mana. Anyway, that's probably not the use case for your Eternal Layover, but I actually have a little bit of a hard time finding a great use case for this one. Clearly, you know, if you swarm up with a bunch of cheap death rattles, you can use this to activate all of those death rattles, destroying your own stuff, and then giving the Reborn, they're coming back, so you get another wave. We've seen some swarmy stuff. We had Eliza giving all of your undead, bonus attack, killing that off a couple times. Having these really swarmy sticky boards can be pretty cool. This sort of also has a board clear benefit against your opponent's stuff, but it's clunky because, if your opponent has a board full of 8/8s or whatever, you can reduce their size, destroy them with Reborn, they come back with 1 health. Then there's stuff like Threads of Despair or something that could be a more easy follow-up to take out all those 8/8s, but that's a sort of clunky 2-card combo that still doesn't work all that well because you kind of need the Threads of Despair, I think, to go off afterwards because of the ordering between Reborn and Death Rattles. Like, Death Rattles resolve before Reborns resolve, so I think there's some weirdness there. So even that doesn't really make sense as like a 2-card combo board clear. So it's some middle ground where you're trying to benefit your own swarmy death rattle stuff, and maybe sometimes having a payoff with your opponent's things getting wiped out or smaller if you have, some kind of little AoE follow up. Maybe you got the shaman drink and you use this, put everything to 1, you use the shaman drink that deals 1 to all enemies, that wipes them out. There's some stuff like that that's kind of cool, but I think it's still ultimately fairly awkward, and having a deck that does both of those things well, wants to remove the opponent's cards with a 2-card combo, but also wants to support your own death rattle swarm package. I don't know the decks are going to find that middle ground where they want to do both, and I think it probably needs multiple upsides to feel worth it and not feel as clunky. So I don't know if this is strong enough in just a full-on death rattle swarm. Sometimes you just want to keep putting in pressure and finding damage and developing new threats, not kind of, doubling down on the same few early game cards. Even if there is like an Eliza in the mix, it may just not be a big enough payoff in that case. So it's okay, but it just feels clunky to me. And then finally for Death Knight, we have Soul Searching. This card looks potentially pretty strong, but note that it does have a double Unholy Rune, which right now feels like a big limitation for most Death Knight decks. Of course, they're going triple rune, and that has been the case for a while. This rune problem in Death Knight just seems to keep cropping up, where it's really hard for Death Knights to play a more all-in sort of game plan. But Unholy has been one of the more successful ways, I think, to do that, because you can kind of commit to that aggressive undead strategy of things. But I will say this card doesn't really fit that aggressive undead strategy all that well. You're probably not really that interested in copying a specific card from your deck. This is usually something you want to do in decks with like higher powered late game payoffs, so more control-y decks. I mean, even I think a Rainbow Death Knight would love a card like this. We've seen this sort of thing succeed a ton in both Druid and Priest. We're able to copy these really big payoff cards. Does a full-on Unholy deck, or at least 2-part Unholy deck, really want to do this as much? Like maybe you can grab a Reska. There's always the Titan. There's a few things that come to mind, but not as likely to find those, because this is just discover a card, not even discover a minion. So you may not have an easy time to do that. And then it is a pretty big corpse commitment as well. It can be good to spin corpses, but if you want to do this like on turn 2, for instance, you're not going to have 5 corpses yet. So it's not all that flexible to play that early, which I guess does reflect the same kind of cards often in Priest and Druid. They take a little bit of ahead of the time work. You gotta put in some kind of condition and then it works, but all the same, a little iffy. Now I will say, like, Warlock perhaps has more things I'm interested in to do with Soul Searching, but at the same time they gotta commit to the Tourist, and that again pushes your deck into, I think, a more aggressive death rattle-y tokeny kind of line very often, which maybe doesn't support this that well. So all in all, it is a card with a high power level. I don't want to overlook that. Like, this can be a very powerful effect, but I think the limitations here from a rune standpoint and perhaps from a corpse standpoint could hold this one back. So moving on to the Warlock cards here, we've got Deadline, a 2-mana shadow spell. It's tradable and temporary, and I have a feeling some people will not be too up on the keyword temporary. It's been pretty common with the gift cards, but it was a fairly new change to actually keyword it. Fairly new, I'll say. But we should pull up the official wording so that you guys can read the official wording of temporary, because I think it's important. Discarded at the end of your turn, which again, with the gift cards, and this is the first one I pulled up here, discover one of these, then it goes away if you don't use it. That's been very common with all the gifts. Here it's important because anytime Deadline is going to show up in your hand, that's like in your opening hand, as soon as you draw it, it's going to go away, right? It's only got that one turn of use. So you're basically either forced to use it or you have to trade it away. And, like, particularly if it shows up in your opening hand, you're going to have to trade it away if you want to get use out of your Deadline at all, which sort of puts this, like, 1-mana tax of sorts on it, which clearly, like, an aggressive deck's not going to be able to tolerate that. But I think some slower control decks won't necessarily mind, because as soon as you get to, like, turn 2, even turn certainly 3 or 4, using a 2-mana spell to even clear like a 3/3 or a 4/4 if you don't have much else to do, it's not great, obviously, but you might be okay with that. You might not be mad to just say, okay, look, I don't want to spend more mana on this tradable. you know, I could try to save this up for later, but this is an aggressive matchup. I'm just going to use my deadline as a really cheap removal card, clear that 3/3 or whatever, and be happy. So it's maybe just like those first couple turns that it gets awkward, or maybe certain situational moments later on where there's just nothing good to kill and you just got to trade it off. But you might be able to sustain a little bit more sacrifice there. That said, too, sometimes you have a 5-minute card that you want to play on turn 5. If your deadline hits your hand at that point, you're like, crap, I really need to play this 5-minute card right now. So that awkwardness could come back to bite you rather often. Now, one thing I do want to talk about, because of that wording very, very carefully, which is it's going to come up in another card later, more importantly, but do keep in mind that it does say discarded at the end of your turn, which could technically have some relevance, particularly in Warlock. Like, maybe there's a card that comes along 6 months from now or something that says, like, you know, at the end of the turn, add your discarded cards back to hand, or cast a random card you discarded this turn, or whatever. Or I guess, you know, that's end of turn, so there's some weirdness there, but you get the idea. Some card that could somehow interact with this because it got discarded, which would of course give this another nudge up in power level, and perhaps the temporary aspect could be beneficial, not necessarily a downside or a restriction. So ultimately, this is a pretty cool design that might have some future layers built into it. As it stands right now, I think it's okay. I think some decks, if they have really strict mana demands, will not have space for this, but there might be others that are a little bit more loose and flexible with their mana that do find some space for this. As far as Rogue is concerned, man, Rogue, I don't know, dude. Rogue doesn't mind cheap removal necessarily, but mana inflexibility for Rogue is pretty high. Like, they usually want to be doing specific things at specific times, and although they can often manipulate their mana in a lot of ways, like having that 1 mana overhead on a lot of turns probably doesn't work for Rogue, who's playing so low to the ground and just trying to weave a billion cards. So I don't really see this making a ton of sense at Rogue, not to mention, of course, just sometimes running that Rogue Tourist or the Warlock Tourist can feel pretty tough in Rogue. So moving on here to Fine Print, a new 4 mana shadow spell for Warlock. Deal 4 damage to all minions. Excess damage hits your hero, which, man, so theoretically this could be a Pain Warlock card where you just, you know, reset the board and you take 10 damage to the face or whatever, and you instantly dump some Molten Giants or Horrors or whatever other things Pain Warlock is trying to cheat out in that way. In reality, oh boy, I don't know, man. I think that's really tough and risky. Number one, the way Pain Warlock is built today, it definitely wants to play from ahead and be on board big and be smacking you a ton, because it doesn't necessarily have a lot of game-ending damage, so it needs to play from board and develop and stick those threats. And this definitely goes counter to that. Like, once you fall behind in Pain Warlock, it's really hard to get it back. Even with a card like this that resets, I worry it would still be too hard to get it back, even if you like board clear and double dump some Molten Giants or something. It's okay, but man, it's so risky, right? You're just playing so thin when it comes to health totals that that makes you really nervous. And a lot of board states, either, you know, you won't deal enough damage to yourself to matter for your own redevelopment, or you'll take too much, or you'll wipe out your own board. There's just a lot of risk inherent to this, of course, not even just from a damage standpoint, but just like there will be moments you can't play this because you're ahead on board and you've got a dead card in hand. You'd rather have something that's a follow-up or a threat or a denial of some sort, not a card that goes kind of counter to your game plan. Sometimes decks need to go all in, not hedge against their worst case scenarios. So I don't know about this in Pain Warlock. I also don't know about this in even like more controlling Warlocks. There are clearly ways to deny damage that you take. You've got the harp that can, you know, you could play a harp and play this, you won't take any damage, and then it's a pretty efficient board clear at 4, could be pretty nice. But again, it's one of those risky ones where if you don't have your harp or you're to use your harp, you're in trouble, because this might just be dead in hand and impossible to play, less you actually accidentally kill yourself, especially when there's just like a bunch of 1/1s floating around everywhere. It's like, God, you're going to clear up 2 or 3 1/1s always, and that's just like really ratcheting that damage up in some pretty scary territory. So I think a little bit difficult to use from a Rogue standpoint. I don't know, man. Maybe, well, Rogue just doesn't have any life gain or denial at all of this damage, so it's really risky for Rogue. I don't really think they want this or need this either. So moving on to Paladin, we've got Vacation Planning. This is a 4-mana spell. This one's pretty cool. It does a lot of stuff. It restores 4 health, summons 3 Silverhand Recruits, and draws 2 cards. So, I mean, I hate to write off any card that just does a lot of things, because this does do so freaking much. I will say the things it does are directionally a little confused. You've got sort of a defensive game plan here with restoring 4 health. Like, okay, if I'm using that on my hero especially, that's pretty defensively minded. But then you've got some board development, and it's not the most significant board development, frankly, on turn 4, right? That's just 3 1/1s. It's a little late for those 1/1s to be coming in, I think. Obviously, Silverhand Recruit synergies, there's token synergies in Paladin. There are ways that gets better. We're going to see a card in a minute that makes that potentially better, but still, it's not the biggest development. And the draw 2 cards is definitely nice. So that's the one where you're like, okay, all kinds of decks like to draw 2 cards. The question becomes, like, if you're playing this in a flood game plan, a token game plan, when are you playing this? You're not hoping to play this on turn 4, probably, because you want to keep trying to develop faster and harder. So are you playing this like, to reload in the late game and try to redevelop a board and, kind of make a second wave or a third wave of attack? I don't know that you actually want a card like this. You might just rather have a cheap card that draws cards and draws you into better developments. So in other words, save some mana on the card draw, spend that mana instead on, things that better reinforce and redevelop your board, because 3 Silverhand Recruits isn't quite enough. In other words, part of the cost budgeting of this card goes into the fact that it's got some healing and that it's all bundled into one thing. So I wondered. That said, it is just a lot of stuff. And I will note too that you can use that 4 health sometimes on a big sea giant or something, and then it feels like you're actually still using that 4 health to develop the board instead of just, heal your hero or whatever wasted sort of thing. So I think this is pretty good. That said, I wonder if I'm just giving this card a nod because I don't like very many of the other cards. I wonder if this just looks good in comparison to everything else in the mini set. So it's like I'm kind of bumping it up in my head because of that, and still sort of trying to talk myself out of it in this review a little bit. Like, I'm not sure it's as good as it actually seems, or if that's just us being down on a lot of other cards. I guess I'll say that. And I don't really know that Mage needs this either. It feels like this is pretty firmly designed for Paladin. So moving on to the Busy Bot. This is a 2-mana 3/2 mech. Battlecry, give your 1 attack minions +1/+1. So we just talked about some of those token and Silverhand Recruit synergies that might exist. I actually like Busy Bot quite a bit. I think this is one of the better looking cards in the mini set to me. Solid base stat line. You're happy to play a 3/2 sometimes on 2 just to get things moving and going, especially if you just hit a 1-drop. This on a Righteous Protector is a better turn than people probably think. That Righteous Protector on 1 can suddenly trade into your opponent's 3/2 that they've developed, and you get a clean trade, you get a body down. Maybe some mech synergies come into that, but I kind of doubt it. But there is also that 1-drop mech a lot of people play. Hammuff Paladin runs it. I can't think of his name, Delivery Drone or something like that. It's not that at all. It's Drone Deconstructor. I got one of the words right. I'll take it. Something like Drone Deconstructor in a Busy Bot. Maybe not that bad, right? Just getting some mechs going. And then, of course, there's the boards later where you develop multiple Silverhand Recruits. You muster for battle in a Busy Bot. And then it's actually really significant board stabilization where you're getting, effectively +3/+3 or even more out of your Busy Bot if you have a full-on Silverhand Recruit strategy. So I don't think it's bad on turn 2, and I think it's, of course, potentially really good later. This can also just be damage as well. If you've already got the board sitting waiting to attack, you use this, and it's just nice damage output. So it's kind of a like Power of the Wild of old, but on a body that has its own potential. So I think Busy Bot's actually pretty good for Paladin, but again, maybe not really noteworthy for Mage. And then finally for Paladin is Trustfall. This is a 4-mana spell. Discover 2 minions that cost 5 or less. They gain each other's attack and health. Do know that you're just adding these to hand, of course. They're not getting summoned or anything. You're just discovering them. They're going to be 2 smaller sort of things. You won't often get like 2 5-drops. You'll often get like, some 1-drops and some 3-drops and 2-drops are the most common probably costs. And then they're going to gain each other's stats. So if you gain like a 3-mana 3/3 and a 2-mana 2/2, that 3-mana 3/3 is going to become a 3-mana 5/5, and your 2-mana 2/2 is going to become a 2-mana 5/5. So, they're each going to be subsequently larger than they would normally be by trading them off. I don't know. I feel like I'm describing this so awkwardly, but hopefully it's coming through. So spend 4 mana. That's a lot of overhead for 2 totally random things that are marginally larger than usual. If you do get like 2 5-drops, of course, they might gain, 5/5 and 5/5, and then it's kind of 10 and total buffs or whatever. Could be even bigger, of course. But it's this downturn on turn 4 that's just so punishing for random stuff, and the results are wildly inconsistent. The buffs alone aren't going to be enough to do the job. Hand buff Paladin's playing stuff that's buffed that much or more, and it's things you love with effects you love. It's your Sandcastle, it's your Tigress plushie, and all these amazing effects that are awesome instead of just random things. And sometimes you're just going to get a pile of cards that do nothing and have tiny awful stats, and it's going to feel terrible. So in essence, I think this is really bad. I think you can't afford to spend 4 mana to just generate 2 meaningless things. Sure, you discover this sometimes in a grindy value game somehow. Maybe it pays off. There's some cool stuff you can do, but ultimately no deck's going to be able to afford to run this, I don't think, because just too slow and, again, too inconsistent. So moving on over to Priest here. We got the Job Shadower, a 3-mana 4/3 undead. Battlecry over here. Took damage this turn. Summon a copy of this. So we've got the sort of self-damage stuff in Priest, which I guess I realize now I don't think I've seen anyone play this against me ever. I mean, it's definitely not a meta deck. We've got, some good Priest decks, like Overkill Priest is really good right now, but this self-damage stuff, I just have not seen it. Zarimi Priest is also really good too. This package is completely fallen apart. I guess I haven't seen it in Demon Hunter either, if I think about it. Yeah, Demon Hunter went all pirates, and I don't think this card is enough to change that. Ultimately, 2 4/3s on turn 3. It's not crazy bad, it is a pile of stuff, but it's also not crazy good. The meta can develop a lot of minions early and a lot of stats early, and this just doesn't go far enough. And then sometimes too, it's actually going to be kind of hard to do this on turn 3. Like maybe Demon Hunter has the benefit of equipping a weapon ahead of time and can attack in and maybe more easily activate this, but Priest typically has to spend mana in some way to damage themselves, which means, this is getting pushed a turn or 2 later into the game, and by the time you get turn 4 or 5, this is just absolutely meaningless from a stat standpoint. Like, the decks are developing a ton of stats. This won't go far at all. So I just don't think this is enough. Like, there is some consideration for buffing this or manipulating in some way because it is a copy. Maybe there's something there, but a lack of reactivity and the conditionality on this one, I think, makes it a really hard sell. So next up is the brochure for Priest. Silverman brochure, Silver Moon brochure is 2 mana, holy spell, give a minion immune this turn and +2/+2. And then Gilneas brochure is 2 mana, silence a minion and give it -2/-2. So I mean, these are both fine. I think, targeted silence and debuff that can just like kill some things. It can kill that death rattle we saw the very first card, right? That's actually a great answer to that guy. So there's some backloaded death rattles in particular that are pretty cool for Gilneas brochure to tackle. And then Silver Moon, I don't know why I can't say that brochure, is all about developing a board, using this to essentially trade up safely, protect your asset while removing your opponents, taking that value trade, and that's kind of cool too. But I do wonder, do decks need both of these? And finding them at the right time and right moment, as is always the case for the brochures, I feel like it's gonna feel extra awkward with this one. Like, okay, I developed a 1-drop on turn 1, but I have Gilneas brochure now on turn 2, and I can't buff it and take this trade. And then later you desperately need a silence and you're on Silver Moon. So I don't know, man. I think the inflexibility of this flexibility, as we've talked about with these previously, is probably going to be more of a headache than it's worth, because I don't think either of these effects are so good or noteworthy that you're willing to take that risk when running this card. And I don't think that changes for Demon Hunter either. And the next up for Priest is the Envoy of Prosperity, a 2 mana 4/4 battlecry, but the highest cost card in your hand on top of your deck. So this is basically an overstated 2-drop with a downside. You're losing that resource in hand and just drawing it again, on the next turn. So, it's coming back, but do keep in mind you're still missing a card draw. You would normally have drawn something else instead, so you're losing 1 total resource. I don't think this is going to be worth it in that case for the 2 mana 4/4. It is still to this day a big 2-drop. We've had plenty of these 2 mana 4/4s get printed with downside, and they never seem to be worth it because stats just get pushed so quickly in the mid game these days that these 4/4s don't keep up with any sort of future lines. You know, as soon as turn 3 or 4, they're falling way behind, and it's not enough to kind of help you stabilize into that future game or push enough aggression really either. So you know, this is a big downside, even for aggressive decks that you may think, you know, don't need as many resources. They kind of do these days. Even aggressive decks need reload. They need a lot of weapons and tools to win a game. Not literal weapons, but you know what I mean. Assets to win a game, and it's a big risk. Now, the other side of this card is the kind of top deck priest stuff. You know, we had like Naren's Sooth Fancy for priest, get 2 fortunes that are copies of the top card of your deck. There's something here that might be more intriguing for a slower priest deck. Like, you know, I just really specifically want to find my Titan or whatever. I want to get copies of the Titan. So I play Envoy of Prosperity to put that Titan at the top, play the Narain Sooth Fancy. It's a couple 4/4s. It's 6 mana. It's pretty weak on 6, but this being a little bigger helps a hair. But, you know, if you're getting a lot of extra Titans and stuff, there's something cooler here. So I do actually like Envoy much better as a top deck priest enabler than as like an aggro card with downside that's utilizing its stats in that fashion. That said, you know, we just haven't seen this top deck priest stuff get there, or really even right now, none of the sort of you know, more value control oriented priests, even Reno priests, have found success. It's all Overheal priest, which is pretty aggressive, and Zarimi priest, which is pretty aggressive. So it's going to take more than just this to push that kind of deck, I think, at a success. But it's intriguing, man. If we get into a value meta, that's a fun little combo, and that sort of priest too can probably risk losing resources because it's generating so many throughout the course of the game. You don't mind losing 1 card in hand. That's not necessarily going to be a problem, just because that upside of the copies is going to be so high. Moving on to Druid here, we've got Handle with Bear, which I do love the artwork and name of this card. It's very funny. 2 mana nature spell. I don't actually know why this is a nature spell, though. It doesn't have any like nature magical energy, which is usually the case. Usually if it's just like an action card where there's just like physical actions happening, it's not a nature spell. And this is just like 2 bears. Maybe the fact that they're transformed makes them naturey, but we've had plenty of examples of like animals and transform stuff. That's not, it doesn't matter. This is irrelevant. Get 2 3/3 bears with taunt. Each turn they're in your hand, they gain +1/+1. You can see there the bear gaining +1/+1. I think it's going to be really tough for Druid to care about this. It is sort of a 4/4 bear on turn 3, which that's a Misha, but Misha has not broken the game ever. So that's a very, very, very old kind of play. And, you know, saving up a bear for 4 or 5 turns or whatever until it's bigger, it's just not going to matter. Like, Druid can do so many crazy powerful things in late game. Having a 7/7 bear or something, 8/8 bear is just not going to be significant. There is something intriguing here maybe with Warrior, since this card can be played in Warrior through the tourist. We have these taunt hand buff things in Warrior. This does kind of double down on the taunt hand buff, both generating the taunts in hand for that value, and then, you know, you're buffing those, and then these buff themselves. Maybe there's a critical mass there where the bears get there, but I still don't really have any trust in Taunt Warrior becoming a meta deck by any means. So I'll have fun with this in Warrior, but I just don't think it's going to be good enough. Moving on to the Number Cruncher. This is a 4 mana 2/1 beast. It's got Rush and Taunt, and choose thrice. Gain +2 attack or +2 health. So basically can gain up to 6 of each of those. So it could be like a 2/7 taunt, or perhaps more importantly, an 8/1 with Rush, which is kind of cool. I think there are some, you know, I need to kill a Molten Giant really bad, and this can do that. I don't know that you're thrilled to spend 4 mana to do it, but you're probably not going to be mad. And then, you know, matches where you don't need the crazy removal, a 2/7, or maybe you just take the 4/5 taunt. I don't know. Maybe you take the Yeti with taunt. That said, none of those plays are like crazy exciting, right? It's like they're okay in desperation. They're okay if you discover this. They're probably great in arena, I can imagine, or maybe just okay actually in arena too. So this is one of those cards. It's like, yeah, I can concoct those scenarios, but actually making space for this in a deck, especially a Druid deck, seems very iffy. There's maybe a beast angle. You know, even choose 1 synergies don't actually work with this since you're choosing thrice. So I don't even see like a choose 1 deck coming along that saves this in any way. And because of that, ultimately, I do kind of think this just feels like filler once again. And I don't think Warrior needs this, even with taunt hand buff stuff. It's kind of cool that it has Rush, but still just not enough. Moving on over to Demon Hunter. This is a 2 mana spell. It's got Lifesteal and deal 4 damage to a minion. then put a random demon that costs 5 or more on top of your deck. So this is, a nice, efficient early game removal card with some nice bonus life gain. That is cool. We like that. If it just said lifesteal, deal 4 to a minion, we'd be like, yes, this is awesome. But man, that second line of text is tough. Put a random demon on top of your deck that costs 5 or more, which basically kills your next draw. Obviously, you're getting this demon instead of the card you want in your deck, which that sucks. Now, the demon pool, I mean, like, some of these are great. Window Shopper's been a pretty great card. It's pretty cool and big. I don't think you'd be mad necessarily if you got like an Opera Soloist sometimes. I think you'd be very mad if you got an all-terrain Void Hound. That's just obviously garbage. You'd probably be pretty mad with an Abyssal Bassist in most instances. It's not like terrible necessarily, but I don't know, it's not great. And some of these are also just pretty expensive too. I mean, you'd be pretty pumped with Sargeras. You're probably not too mad with Magtheridon. They're not bad cards on average. Like the fact that they're high cost, but it's just that it's not cards in your deck, and it's risky, and finding a perfect moment for those is kind of shaky. So it's just, the question then becomes like, is this efficient enough early game removal that it's worth that risk? Or perhaps can I benefit from that big demon in some ways if I'm running something like a big demon deck where I just want big demons anyway, especially if them being right there on top of the deck can matter in some way. That's a potential bonus instead of a downside in those decks, but again, kind of an iffy one. That said, looking at the demon pool, it is better than I thought. I'll be honest, that was a better looking demon pool than I expected. That gives me a little bit more hope for this, just because it is such a good early game removal card. So maybe I'm kind of okay with this. And in Shaman, I guess it is a fell spell as well, which does have some relevance for Razzle Dazzler. But is it better than Sigil of Skydiving, which is also a fell spell that Shaman plays regularly and has access to and is really good with Cookie? I don't think so. So I don't know that you'd need multiples necessarily. I also don't know that Rainbow Shaman even... But I don't know. If the deck moved a little bit more defensively, maybe. That said, Sigil of Skydiving is not a bad defensive card either in some ways. Just like deals 3 damage to stop. You can trade in on it and iterate that damage a little better against different shaped boards sometimes. So I think this is solid. I actually think this is solid, just not amazing. Moving on here to the Spirit Peddler, a 6-mana 6/6 demon with Rush and Death Rattle. Reduce the cost of a random minion in your hand by 6, which is nice. That effectively makes this kind of a free 6/6 with Rush. That said, a couple things with this one, right? It has to be a big minion to net the full discount. If you have a 2-cost minion in hand, this reduces that by 6. You're obviously not netting a 6-cost discount. You're only getting a 2-cost discount in that case. Maybe it feels better if the opponent plays Cold Feet. I think that still works. I think you'd still get the full discount there, maybe. Usually those things do track the negative values and adjust. But anyway, in normal scenarios, you'd have to isolate your deck down to some pretty big stuff to make this discount feel worth it. I also think there's actually some risk that this doesn't always die off immediately, which you probably really want it to. You probably want to realize the upside of this discount and then play the thing right away, especially if it's like exactly 6 or maybe even a 5 cost. Because sometimes this just won't feel like enough of a play on turn 6 to compete. If your opponent slams Razzle Dazzler and they've got a giant board of things, you need stuff to keep up. And one of these is just not enough to keep up with late game boards in modern day Hearthstone. So, if you're running into 5/5 taunts from your opponent's Druid Titan, you're like, oh crap, this didn't die. I don't get my Death Rattle. I'm just playing, a 6/6 with Rush that didn't advance the game plan any. And that feels iffy. So it's shaky. Plus, it's like, okay, well, if it hits if there's bigger than 6, if it's 8/8s on board or whatever, it's like, okay, I still got to solve this problem. It's just inflexible from its reduction and inflexible from its kind of demand to die with this Rush trade. So it's not only got deck construction problems to find the right cost stuff in hand for it, but all that onboard thing. It just, I think, again, I hate to keep using this word, but I think it's going to be awkward or clunky. I know I keep going back to that, but that's what I'm seeing. Like a lot of these cards, it's like they're going to be hard to weave in and make them fit. And I just don't see them developing as they need to, particularly for a higher cost card like this. So yeah, maybe there's a big Demon Hunter deck of some kind that pulls all this together, but it seems very challenging. All right, so moving on here to the Infernal Stapler, a 3-mana 3/3 weapon. After your hero attacks, deal 3 damage to your hero, which, boy, this seems scary. Like, I don't really want to engage in this race under normal conditions. Like, it's just, doesn't net any advantage on the damage output. As soon as you start hitting minions with this too, like, forget it. Kill a 3/3, you take 6. Like, oh my god, that is super scary. Clearly this is designed to be used with the priest cards, the pain self-damage priest stuff you get access to with the priest tourist, but we just haven't really seen that working yet, and I don't see this pushing it to that next level to really get it there. So yeah, I mean, we just looked at Job Shadow where like this isn't even a good curve fit. It's like 3 into 3. That's kind of weird. So I don't know, man. It kind of pushes this on a regular, but it takes a while. Like, it takes 3 turns to take the 3 damage, which, that's putting this down pretty late. Arana, same story. Like, that's a 5-cost card. It's like, it doesn't feel like it's going to do enough. I just don't see it. And I think the meta has way too much lethality for this to just get played as is outside of that package. So I just don't see this getting there. So finally, we got some neutral cards to close things out here. This is Busy Peon, a 2-mana 2/3 death rattle. Your next location costs 2 less, which I just don't think this is going to be worth it. Yes, locations are getting played quite a bit. I'm always kind of pleasantly surprised how much locations do get run, but spending 2 ahead of time to cheat out a location for 2 less, it's like, yeah, I just played a 2/3. Like, I'm not really all that excited to do that. There are some locations you can cheat out, much sooner than normal. Prison of Yogg-Saron or whatever, I get it down on turn 5, but it's like, I don't know. I never liked Prison of Yogg-Saron anyway, even if it was getting played a ton. It's getting played way less, and getting it down a couple turns earlier doesn't really feel all that meaningful or impactful for such a high risk card. So I don't know, man. I think you'd rather just play a good 2-drop and then just play your location at the time it's supposed to be played. I don't think any like death rattle synergies here make sense, so ultimately it's just not worth it. If this were a battle cry, like maybe you'd feel better about it, but probably not. I still don't really think I'd love this as a battle cry either. I just don't see it with Busy Peon. And then finally here, the Clumsy Steward. This card's pretty crazy. We kind of teased this one earlier with the Warlock stuff. 3-mana 2/4 after any card is drawn, make it temporary, which that applies to your cards and your opponents. So, you just like slam this on turn 3, your opponent draws a card, and if they don't play it that turn, it's gonna get discarded. So, ideally they draw a big Titan or whatever they can't play on turn 3, and they just lose access to their big Titan. You could try to force that along a little bit with any sort of mill type play, make your opponent draw stuff. There's actually some of that available in standard format now. I'm thinking about like some of those, I think it's like a Death Knight card that makes them draw 2 and they can't actually play them anyways. That's kind of a guaranteed combo with the Clumsy Steward, as I recall. So, there's some fun ways to advance that. The classic Cold Light Oracles and so on, if we got those back ever, would be a cool way to do that. Naturalize, etc. The old school examples. So there's something neat there for this forced mill, discard your resources kind of thing. There's also, as I teased with the Warlock set, like maybe there's a world where you use this on Warlock cards and you draw a bunch of stuff yourself and you hope to discard your own things if they benefit from being discarded, which Discard Warlock has historically always had a handful of those at any given time. There's some now as well. So maybe a discard enabler, if that word discard is actually true in the keyword for temporary, as we read earlier, that might be a fun little bonus synergy for this. So I don't think this gets played much, though. It's just a regular old disruption card. I think you kind of have to force it to make it worth it, because very often they will draw a thing that they don't care to lose, number one, or a thing that is like, okay, whatever, I'll just like play this. This is fine. It was cheap. I'm happy to play it anyway. You kind of underdeveloped on your turn 3. I'm not that worried about it. And then they kind of, if they don't kill it, they sort of pass it back to you, and you've got the same problem. Like, oh crap, they didn't kill this, and now my card's temporary, and I drew my Titan. Oh crap. So there's this little back and forth thing that's kind of funny. So fun card, interesting design. I will try to make this work with some mill stuff, but ultimately I don't think, once again, a competitive meta card. So yeah, that's the mini set. I don't know if I did the best job talking through all these, but ultimately I just don't think the power level's crazy. And I'm only getting a couple fun new ideas for things. Like Clumsy Steward, I got some fun ideas. Like maybe we'll try some big Demon Hunter stuff. That sounds kind of fun. Taunt Handbuff Warrior, we've gone back to about 45 times. Maybe Top Deck Priest has got a nudge. Token Paladin, I don't really love, but maybe it's a nudge. But yeah, I'm just not seeing a ton of interesting stuff to do. That said, I'm curious. You guys have cool ideas for decks. I want to play some stuff this week with the new cards, but just gonna see what jumps out. So anyway, share your thoughts on these. And oh crap, I gotta do the star ratings. First, let's do the star ratings from 1 to 5 stars. Travel Security is a 2-star card. Eternal Layover is a 2-star card. Soul Searching is a 3-star card. Deadline is a 3-star card. Fine Print is a 2-star card. Vacation Planning is a 4-star card. Busybot is a 4-star card. Trustfall is a 1-star card. Job Shadower is a 2-star card. Silver Moon Brochure is a 2-star card. Envoy of Prosperity is a 3-star card. Handle with Bear is a 2-star card. Number Cruncher is a 2-star card. Demonic Deal is a 3-star card. Spirit Peddler is a 2-star card. Infernal Stapler is a 2-star card. Busy Peon is a 1-star card. Clumsy Steward is a 2-star card. Yeah, there we go. That's the review. So share your thoughts on these cards down below. Do you guys feel as sort of this face about the mini set as I do? I hope I'm wrong. I hope some cool stuff pops up, but we'll see. We'll play it out, see how it goes. So stay tuned for at least, yeah, I'd like to do at least 2 or 3 videos for the mini set and go from there, but would appreciate you watching as always. I still want to keep making Hearthstone videos, so as much as you can, share this channel, you know, whatever. People will find it, I guess. I try to share it here and there, so hopefully people find it still. That said, love you, thank you for joining me, and until next time, game on.